In most Western countries, if you are nude in public, you can face punishments of up to 1 year in jail and up to $15,000 at the high end in fees. We all find it pretty normal to, wear clothes in public everywhere we go, and actually think it's super strange if anyone doesn't do that. If your parents walked in on you naked as a teenager, people who literally wiped your butt every single day for years, and saw you naked for years, it was embarrassing. And you would try to cover up as quickly as possible. And they would try to close the door as quickly as possible. But not only that, if we went to a beach, how uncomfortable would most of us be if we just saw a whole bunch of dudes with their penises out? Or a bunch of women with no pants on? We all find it pretty weird. The truth though, is that this is a fairly new phenomenon. In past years, entire communities would be naked around one another, use the bathroom with one another, bathe naked with hundreds of people together, and even just have sex with family members in the same room as them. Well, not literally like have sex with them, but like have sex with someone, with their family members, like in the room. Humans spent a majority of our history publicly nude around one another. That's why researchers, philosophers, and theologians have all been trying to answer what draws people to wear clothes. Some say it's because of social status. Some say it's more for selective reproduction. Some say it's because God said so. I'm your host Dylan, and today I'm going to answer a question that makes people think that you're a hippie. I'll answer the question keeping my biases out as much as possible, just looking at the research, the science, and the data. And boy, is there a buttload. At the end of this video, you're gonna have a complete understanding of why we wear clothes, why we feel ashamed of nakedness, and how long this has been the norm. But first we have to ask, is nudity really a taboo across the entire world? We stay inside our cultural bubbles, so maybe there's other parts of the world that are freely naked. The answer is no for the most part, and this is really strange on a world level. When it comes to genitals, most countries do not allow them to be shown except in designated nude areas. And the two largest countries in the world, India and China, are very strict when it comes to this. The Indian government doesn't allow obscene acts in public, which is fairly vague, but has traditionally included nudity. The society itself is very conservative with nudity, with being nude in public not just being a shame on yourself, but a shame on your entire family. And the Chinese government does not allow nudity in virtually any space. Even what is known as the Beijing bikini, where men roll up their shirts in a bikini shape on a hot summer's day, is looked down upon and banned in some cities, being called, quote, uncivilized behavior. And while there's certain countries, Europe, that have a lot less strict laws and norms around nudity, there's not one modern society that practices any form of a majority of the population being naked in public. Even in the famous free country of Germany, the vast majority of the population wears clothes a vast majority of the time, with only specific areas having predominantly nude people. So when so many cultural norms are specific to one area, why is it nudity that is so culturally universal? Well, the first question I asked myself is, if this is so universal, there's got to be something biological for this nudity taboo. Well, sort of. Let me explain. You could look at modesty as a social evolution. Clothing isn't just practical. It conceals certain body parts, even when not necessarily used for clothing, for warmth or protection, hinting at social regulation of sexual signaling. But of course, there's also the environmental factor. Clothing was used in a lot of environments in order to make humans more suitable for it. If it was cold, very sunny, very dusty, or a lot of bugs, a hugely underrated reason, with bugs even in today's modern world accounting for the majority of animal-related mortality in humans. Clothing was also used for sexual selection. Human females do not have obvious signs of ovulation. When many female animals get swollen up or send off specific pheromones, human females don't give males much to work with. Clothing may have been a way to signal to males that a woman is ovulating, which is somewhat backed by the research, where research has shown that women will wear red when women know that they will meet an attractive man or are open to casual sex. Women have also been shown wearing more skin-tight and revealing clothes during ovulation. This works in the opposite too. Men can also do this. Men can use clothing to also be more skin-tight and more revealing, and can also use clothing as a signal of status, with certain ways of dressing and certain brands signaling to women that the man is high status and powerful and rich. There's also a strange theory from some researchers that clothing was a way of desexualizing family members to decrease incest. Kind of gross to think about and not something I wanted to research more into after learning about. So biology definitely plays a role in how and why we wear clothes. But in any debate, there's another side to it. Nature versus nurture. So how does society play into this whole nudity thing? Well, the short answer is that it plays a big role. But one of the things that I've learned is that a lot of times, something that we think that has lasted forever has only really happened in the last 100 or 200 years. So let's look at past societies and how they handled nudity. In hunter-gatherer societies, early humans were comfortable with nudity. One of the greatest examples of this is the Venus of Willendorf, over 25,000 years old, not showing just a new creation, but an exaggerated model of a nude woman. Then you have the ancient societies of Egypt and Mesopotamia. There's many evolutions to nudity over time in this region, and everything I say about society should be taken with an in general beforehand, of course. And if I make any major mistakes, let me know in the comments, and I'll make a pinned comment correcting them. But in Egypt and Mesopotamia, being nude wasn't inherently wrong, especially if you did something that was very hot. For instance, like metalworking. But clothing was a way of showing off your status, and it was poor people who couldn't afford clothes that were the most nude, and rich people that were clothed the most who could afford clothes. In Greece, male nudity was celebrated to such an extent that any society is likely to follow. To illustrate this, an ancient Greek writer, Hesiod, said this: "Sow naked, and plow naked, and harvest naked, if you wish to bring in all Demeter, great god, fruits in due season." Female nudity was more of an infatuation in art, showing the uniqueness between the two sexes. Females may have participated in Olympic Games nude, but that's not certain. Interestingly, to our Western ears, Greeks thought of themselves as civilized compared to other barbarian peoples because they didn't wear clothes and the barbarians did. A reversal of what the later European descendants thought. But then let's fast forward to the Middle Ages, where for most lower class Europeans, it was not expected to have a private place for nudity. So public nudity was commonplace. And not only when cleaning themselves in public bathhouses, which were popular, because until the beginning of the 8th century, Christians were baptized naked to represent that they emerged from baptism free of sin. The cultural standard was put into question when there was a debate between medieval Catholic theologians. Some believed that nudity was okay, as long as it didn't lead to sex outside marriage. But some of the most important theologians of the Middle Ages, like Augustine and Thomas Aquinas, believed that lust was so terrible, even calling it a disorder, that nudity needed to be heavily avoided. And then of course there's Renaissance Europe, which has all those naked pictures. You know, the place where everyone roamed around naked, hugging each other, loving trees, and expressing the most important people naked. However, the truth is a little more nuanced. During Renaissance Europe, nudity did have a resurgence in the arts, with arts like the birth of Venus and the creation of Adam showing some of the most important holy people to medieval Christians naked. But public nudity in the real world was still just as taboo as ever. But I've been fairly Eurocentric so far, so let me dive into the two biggest Asian societies and the two biggest societies in the whole world. In Indian society, during the ancient times, nudity was usually used in religious ceremonies and rituals. Images of nude, divine, and human figures were not viewed as profane, but an illustration of the divine beauty and the cycle of life and cosmic principles. These practices became less and less common as Muslim rulers took over more and more of India and became exceedingly rare during British colonization, where the Victorian age Brits stomped down hard at public nudity in India. In the modern day, there's many Indians that harken back to the traditional sense of public nudity, but most see nudity as taboo like most Western societies. In China, Chinese cultures across time have usually had the opinion of nudity being taboo, as nudity is an affront to human dignity, reflecting the belief that humanness in the Chinese context is not innate to everyone, but is earned by the correct Confucian behavior. All this goes to show that most societies at some point have had some sort of prohibition on nudity, with it becoming increasingly rare as time went on. This brings us to our current culture. In the West, but this can also apply to Islamic societies, nudity is because of religion. The story of Adam and Eve, shared by both Christianity and Islam, links shame with nakedness. In the moment they gain knowledge, they realize they are nude, and they cover themselves. This symbolic connection between nudity and guilt became foundational. In the Christian tradition especially, nudity has long been associated with original sin, an inherited shame that we all carry for being human. As Western societies developed, they absorbed these religious ideas into the culture and into the law. Catholic Europe looked to theologians like Augustine and Thomas Aquinas, who argued that the body, especially when unclothed, was a source of temptation and disorder. Later, Protestant Europe could look to reformers like Martin Luther, who emphasized that believers are clothed in the righteousness of Christ. In the American context, these ideas took root deeply, especially through the Puritans, one of the founding cultural forces in early America. Puritans viewed all nudity outside of sex as sinful and corrupting. This moral framework likely explains why even today, many Americans feel discomfort around non-sexual nudity, whether it's a mother nursing in public or a toddler running around unclothed. From birth, the body is sexualized. But religion isn't the only reason that nudity became taboo. Another reason that can't be understated is the effect of colonization. When Europeans conquered less developed parts of the world, they saw a culture more comfortable with nudity. This comfort created an idea inside the Western psyche that a sign of being primitive and uncivilized is not wearing clothes. This is not very different to how the ancient Egyptian and Mesopotamians thought about nudity. The elites wanted to indicate that they were richer, more powerful, and in charge, and better than the colonial population. While widespread colonization by Western powers isn't prevalent like it used to be, it did create a cultural force that still exists to this day, even if the original reason that it came into fruition isn't still around. Another thing that contributes to this is how unpopular nudist organizations are. When you think of public nudity, the most common groups that pop up into your head are topless feminists and hippies, both of which are mostly disliked by a majority of Americans. We all know that nudity is taboo here in the US, but we think that Europe is this little hippie land where everyone just walks around unclothed. But how true is this in reality? In countries like Germany, Spain, the Netherlands, Finland, Sweden, Norway, Denmark, the Czech Republic, New Zealand, which isn't European but pretty close, public nudity is fine as long as it's not done with the intent to offend, arouse, or cause disturbances. And they share something sort of in common with the US, where toplessness is available in the majority of states, as can be seen here on the map. And in many cities like Philly and Seattle, you can be fully nude. But in general, nudity is far more common in Europe than the US. And while laws may allow for American women to be topless, you'd be hard-pressed to find a woman who actually uses this law unless they're at a nude beach. So then what created this divergence between America and Europe? Well, there's a few thoughts. Europe being a much less religious society than the US, with the average percent of the European population who identifies as very religious being around 10 to 20% versus the US at over 50%. And interestingly enough, the US is a huge outlier in this regard, as it's usually the rich countries that are not religious and the poor that are. And the US is the one major outlier here. And Europeans also tend to grow up in an environment where nudity doesn't equate to sexualization. American children are basically taught from the get-go that nudity is something for the adult eye only. This goes hand in hand with how many Northern and Central European countries have made communal saunas and bathhouses, which increases public acceptance. While the US has no real equivalent, maybe communal showers after a sports game or communal showers in college, but most of the time here, there's still curtains that close people off from one another. And the media in the US heavily sexualizes or completely censors nudity, which are complete opposite things, but they create this confusing mindset that reinforces the connection between nakedness and sexualness. This leads to real differences, where surveys found that 15% of Germans have sunbathed nude, while only 2% of Americans have. And over half of American women think it's fair for women and men to have different rules about toplessness, while around 40% of Germans have claimed to have gone to the sauna nude. Nudity may seem like a private matter, and public nudity is a shameful matter that hasn't been around for a real long time. And that's largely the case. However, the way our current society understands nudity is not how it's always been across human history, or even across much of the modern world. Much of how the modern world treats nudity is due to religion and conservatism, or a lack of religion in changing social values. In the end, the taboo isn't really about naked bodies. It's about what those naked bodies say in each culture. In America, it means sexualness, while in other countries, it doesn't mean that. And that changes more than you think. One of the things that the nudity around taboo feeds into is men's attraction to boobs and butts. If you found interesting learning about the biological and social reasons around the taboo around nudity, you'll love to learn about how these two covered areas are the infatuation of at least half the population. You can check that video out right here. Now don't forget that Germany is not completely naked. You can bare your breasts in much of the US and think controversy. I'll catch you over in this video right here.